Welcome to episode 4 of the podcast.
Attack for 20. We're, I guess, naming this episode Winning with Icelander in Uprising Limited.
Yeah.
And we wanted to start actually with a little bit something more casual, and that's Yanji. What'd you do this weekend or last week? Doesn't have to be Fab related, of course.
Yeah.
What's been keeping you busy?
I think in terms of Flesh and Blood, the only Flesh and Blood that I've played was we did like an in-person draft at Youngji's house.
Yeah, we did two. We jammed 2 drafts.
Yeah. And then after that, I've just been playing a lot of Rocket League. Dude,
What did you draft at Youngji's?
I drafted. What did I draft? I drafted Icelander once, and then the second draft I drafted. It was like one of 4. I was like one of 4 fights, I think.
I know, yeah. We like pivoted into it, but you did well. You went. We ended up only doing 2 rounds in the first draft because we wanted to jam a third one. But
Yeah.
I think you went like undefeated, right? I don't think you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I did fine the first draft, and then I was 2-0, and then in the
No,
second.
you were Icelander in the
Oh
first
yeah,
draft.
Icelander. I was 2-0,
Yeah.
and then fine in
Yeah.
the second.
I was fine. You crushed me, and then I think I was Fi again. It was unfortunate. Like it just the way the packs broke down. Like I thought Fi was open.
Yeah. What did you do?
Yeah, sorry.
What did you do this weekend? This is like this is a setup. Michael just wanted to talk about his weekend.
2 days ago, I went to a store in Baltimore called Gamers Core, and I drafted some guys, and I pick one day Flamescale Furnace,
Nice.
and Icelander was very open, and I ended up just having just like a kind of mediocre Fey deck, but with Flamescale Furnace, it really helped in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I never lost a dice roll, so I always got to go second. So
Nice.
it's
It's kind of a shot. A shot at
No, it's
the players of.
No, like I feel like we can talk about this on a later episode, but like in the Fey mirror, like
Yeah.
if you go second and you have Flamescale Furnace, like it's just like harder to lose. Anyways, let me follow up on the pack one pick one tweet. So we typically and I think you and I are on the same page, we don't really like doing pack one pick one content. We find that not only is it a little bit low effort, which I guess we are kind of low effort people, but it's not it's just not like a good representation of like a good drafter. I feel like there's a lot of better ways to kind of test your draft knowledge or like kind of improve your draft knowledge. So I do want to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about the cards in that pack. I just want to say a few things, and that is that Yanji and I are both on the same page that we don't think there's like necessarily a single correct answer.
Right.
And so there's like a range of cards that we think are all like good enough for pack one pick one. But we definitely think there are some wrong answers. So there are some cards that are almost just like strictly worse, just like not good cards. Most of them are yellow. In fact, all of them are yellow. All the yellows are just not like we wouldn't recommend. I think the one thing we wanted to mention is that like draft is kind of like a microcosm. So like when you draft a card, you have to keep in mind what you pass from that pack, and if it's not your pack one pick one, what you received, because all of that matters. And also you can still win a draft even if you kind of take the incorrect pack one pick one, I guess.
Yeah, you can waste multiple picks. You can waste the first 3, first 4, first 5, whatever like picks if you navigate it correctly.
And part of that navigation is knowing what you passed. And so like, as long as like everyone who tweeted back, thank you guys so much for those responses. As long as you had like some justification for why you thought the card you took was the pack one pick one worthy card, I thought that was great. I think that being said though, Yanji and I did have kind of like our pet picks from that pack, and mine is the Quelling Slippers.
Yeah, I like the Red Aether Ice Vein, which is kind of on target for what we're going to be talking about a little bit later. One thing that I did want to mention from the weekend was I got I think like 2 or 3 people either message me or like post on social media that they listened to the podcast and it helped them do pretty well at their RTNs, which is pretty cool, I think.
Oh yeah, I actually so shout out to Caesar. I met someone who literally was talking about the podcast, not realizing that I was one of the hosts. So I'm so glad that people are listening to the podcast. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Michael, whenever he meets somebody who doesn't know who he is, he's like, "Oh, I can't believe this guy doesn't know who I am." So,
I never think that.
so famous.
I never think that. Anyway, so the main topic for today is playing Icelander, winning with Icelander in Uprising Limited, and I think we were inspired to do this based off Alex Sneed's tweet.
Yeah, he was asking like for anybody who's gone 3-0 with Icelander in a draft, like how good does your deck have to be?
And so we wanted to answer that question. We want to answer, what does winning or being successful with Icelander in Uprising Limited look like?
Before we even get into like the cards themselves, let's talk about Icelander as a hero. What does Icelander do, and what are her like strengths and weaknesses?
We'll start with her, what we think are kind of her weaknesses. She starts at 18 health, all right? So she's going to have a little bit less health than the other heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, her cards are less efficient in terms of pure damage. Of course, it's a different type of damage, but if you remove the type of damage and we're just talking about sheer numbers, her cards are less efficient.
Yeah, if all you're doing is just like using the things to attack, like let's say if she didn't have any text and you're just like slinging your spells and then blocking, and then they're just like all your things do damage, and then they just like come back at you. The Fi's just like doing his stuff, attacking with his weapon, they're gonna win out.
Yeah, her cards are just less efficient. They all basically have one less damage.
Sometimes two. She's like a counterpoint to the other two heroes in the set, which kind of want you to play a lot of reds in your deck. She kind of is like flipped. So whereas like a Fi deck might want to play like 8 blues and the rest like reds, Icelander probably wants to play like like 8 reds and like 22 blues. Obviously, it's pretty difficult to get like as high as 22, but
yeah, they'll have some yellows and yeah. But that's kind of the goal, I think. If you don't have enough blues as an Icelander, you almost can't do anything because you can't arsenal blue. And to use your weapon, often you're using at least a yellow, sometimes a blue to either, deal 1 damage or quell 1. Like it's maximum efficient to basically have 2 blues per hand.
Yep.
So we think that if your deck doesn't have like at least around 14 blues, because that kind of increases the chances you'll have 2 blues for most of your hands.
Yeah.
It's just tough. This can be like you can decrease the amount of pressure on your blues by having some 0 cost cards. So this could be like 0 cost Icelander cards that are 0 for 3, like the red ones, or the blue ones, because the blue ones allow you to play a blue from your arsenal and then also just pitch a yellow to use your Waning Moon and still basically have a turn. Also, like Scar for Scar and Flex, the red ones are extremely efficient. But in general, like if you're playing like Fi and you have like a bunch of yellows and blues, you can still have turns. Like you can still, attack with Go Again, swing with the weapon, get the Phoenix Flame. You'll just do a little less damage. But if you don't have blues and Icelander, sometimes you just don't do anything. Like you just have to pass your turn sometimes. It's really awful.
Yeah, like for the other heroes, when they play a yellow, they give up like 1 point of damage. If you're playing Icelander and you have like a yellow in your hand when you as like the last card and you arsenal it, it's like sometimes detrimental. Like you need to take more damage to like get it out of your arsenal and put it on the blue in there.
Yep.
It's really very important to have enough blue non-attack actions.
I guess the last weakness we're attributing to Icelander is sometimes you just get like donked by Dromai. Like there are cards that Dromai and sequences that Dromai can do that are just it's really rough as an Icelander. Just like playing a Yendurai, playing a Necria.
Yeah, especially the dragons, Themai, he just like shuts you out of the game. A lot of the dragons that have large toughness, it's just very difficult for you to be able to deal with, especially like once you get to like Yendurai or Necria or anything that has above 4, it becomes like very difficult to like efficiently play your turn out.
You need to be able to kill the dragon in 1 turn, so you need to be able to deal 4 or 5 damage in 1 turn, and sometimes just like not possible anymore.
So for all of her disadvantages, then why would you ever want to play Icelander? The main advantage is instant speed.
Yeah.
And so instant speed in Flesh and Blood works, I think, a little bit differently than instant speed in a lot of other games because of how the turn cycle is structured. So if you play Kano in limited or in constructed formats, you kind of understand this. But for anybody else, usually like most of the other heroes in Flesh and Blood can't really do anything at instant speed.
And I think when you mean instant speed, you mean dealing damage.
Yeah, dealing damage.
Killing your opponent.
Yeah, we see that Legend Source is very conservative with giving people damage at instant speed. Like
Yep.
Rhinar has it with like one defense reaction,
Yep.
and then Chain had it with one like
Invert
card. Yeah, invert
existence. Yep.
existence. And basically, like part of the reason why damage on your opponent's turn is so powerful is specifically just for like the very last turn of the game, right?
Yep.
And let's talk a little bit about like the math that goes into it. So, in the context of Uprising Draft, if you're playing 5 versus 5, which is like a pretty like quote unquote normal matchup, you're both
Yep.
attacking each other with like attacks on your turn and blocking. In order for you to do damage to your opponent, you have to survive the turn, right?
Yep.
So there's like certain life totals that you can't really go below, or if you do, that you have to like threaten a certain number of cards out of their hand.
Yep.
So like if you go to like I think it's like around 8, like 5 can like very easily do 8 with 3 cards.
Yes.
And so you're gonna have to like block a card out of your hand at least, and then it scales up like the more damage that they're gonna do, with like the number of cards.
Yeah, you gotta survive and you gotta have cards. That's the only way you can deal damage to your opponent. You survive their attack, and then you have at least one card to attack them back with.
Yeah, and then so like if you get caught like below the life threshold where you have to end up just like blocking your whole hand out every turn, like unless your opponent just like straight up bricks a hand and that's just like doesn't have go again or like can't like do damage, then you already lost the game, but you're just like waiting for them to finally put it together.
Icelander kind of breaks that rule, of course, right? Like when we're talking about instant speed, because she's able to put a card in her arsenal and actually play that card on your opponent's turn, it kind of bends the rules a little.
And I think the most damage that a blue card can do out of Arsenal in this format, well,
It's three. So like the red, the blue Ice Vein, or the
the most is like Atoma Duplicity, but that's like
okay, sure. Yes.
but yeah, like the most like reasonable amount of damage that you could do is 3. You can with like alongside your weapon threaten up to like 6 damage on your
Mhm.
opponent's turn, which is pretty strong because like you don't even have to like wait, like you don't there's no like timing, you don't have to wait for your opponent to like finish their attacks. It's just like as soon as they do anything that gives you priority, you can just like throw 6 damage at them. And so I wrote this down as like depending on how much like arcane barrier or like things that they have, because you have this opportunity to do 6 damage at the end of your opponent's turn, that is somewhat like guaranteed damage. Let's say if they have arcane barrier 1 and you do 6 over 2 sources, they can block at most 2 of it. And so you're doing 4 damage guaranteed. And for any other character to do 4 damage guaranteed, they would have to like represent at least 14 to 15 damage, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you put it that way, like for the very last turn of the game, that blue that you put in your arsenal represents like that much damage, like theoretically.
Yeah. And theoretically, in that same sense, like if you're able to kill your opponent, like that way, like you have gotten a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've nullified basically their entire hand if they weren't able to either arcane barrier to stay alive, or use like an oasis respite to stay alive. You've basically nullified like 3 cards or their entire hand and basically their entire turn, and that's like a I don't know, 12, 14, like huge life swing advantage.
Yeah. And I think part of this also kind of lends it like puts the impetus on you to get
Mhm.
your opponent to like that point in the
Yep.
game.
Yep.
If you're just like trading cards with them and you're just like planning to just like block and try to like grind them out, without like doing any damage, like you're not gonna block them out. Like the amount of damage that you would need to do because you have the natural disadvantage of all your cards just doing less damage. It's like so difficult for you to like grind them out in the same way that like a guardian can.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, this is a huge advantage. I don't know if we were able to kind of give you guys that feeling, but we think that, and I think, LSS, the game designers do think is a huge advantage. That's why Icelander actually starts with a health
Mm-hmm.
handicap. And I think the only thing we want to note about this is like there often becomes like this like cat and mouse game in the last turn situations, whereas in Icelander, you can get this huge advantage, like one-shotting your opponent and just like nullifying their entire hand. But if they have an Oasis Respite in their hand, they can almost just one-shot you because you typically are committing like 2 cards to do something like that. And
Yep.
you're probably in a low life situation if you're kind of having to gamble like that.
Yep.
And they can just it's almost like using Oasis Respite aggressively to stay alive and then kill you. This mentality might help you as a Fade drafter, or as a Fade player, kind of board in those Oasis Respites, like they're not just defensive. Sometimes they are used almost aggressively.
And then the other thing, her other main advantage is that she gets free frostbites when she plays ice cards from her arsenal. And so frostbites are worth about like one because they tax your opponent one resource, but
Yeah.
can be worth more than 1 point of damage depending on how like your opponent's hand breaks out.
Yeah. Like if your opponent was planning on like attacking with a Searing Emberblade and they had 2 resources allocated for that, and you give them a frostbite, now they only have 2 resources and they can't even like Emberblade, that's technically like worth like 1.5 if they could still do something with that remaining resource, but it's almost worth like 3
Yeah.
if you just like straight up like they can't Searing Emberblade you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's worth none because they were just gonna have a floating. So like there's variance on how much damage a frostbite is preventing. But typically like, you know, 1, maybe 2, like 1.5-ish is like a good metric, and it's free. Like this is not like Dromai. Dromai has to pitch a red to make an Ash. Like Icelander just like in the drafting process, you just needed to get some blue ice cards, put them in your arsenal, and you get rewarded with the frostbite.
Yeah, and those are maybe like because of this reason, but then also just like in terms of their efficiency, like some of the blue ice cards are just like the cards that you want to pick anyways. And then the last part about kind of Icelander, like what makes Icelander strong is her weapon's actually quite good. 2 resources for 2 damage is just as efficient as Searing Emberblade on your opponent's turn.
Yeah, two resources for 3 damage.
Or sorry, yeah, two
Yeah.
resources for 3 damage.
Yeah.
Is quite strong.
Yeah, I like to think of her Waning Moon as like 2 resources for 3 damage on your opponent's turn. With sometimes when your opponent kind of whiffs, you can also do 2 damage on your turn. Like that's how I think of the weapon. Like we're not trying to do 2 damage on our turn with that weapon.
I think I've done maybe 4 or 5 Icelander drafts now, and
Yeah.
I played maybe like I don't know, like 10 games because not all the
Sure.
drafts I play all the games. I think I've activated Waning Moon on my turn maybe like 3 times.
Yeah.
It's just quite a big disparity. Part of the reason is also because in order for you to do the damage on your turn, you have to give up blocks.
So just as a quick overview, like
Yep.
the cons, she's less efficient. She's very like ratio dependent. You need all the blues, and sometimes she's just like gets destroyed by Dromai.
Yep.
The pros, of course, we can't understate this enough, is just instant speed, dealing damage at instant speed, and killing your opponent on their turn.
Yeah,
and
cheating
nullifying
the
their hand.
Yeah, cheating the turn cycle essentially.
Yep. The free frostbites, and then just like Waning Moon is powerful. Like Ember Blade is also really powerful, so it's just like, you know, she just has a powerful weapon, but that still is a pro.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we kind of know what her strengths and weaknesses are, then how do you identify? Let's say you've decided, okay, I want to draft Icelander, or how do you even
Get to that state.
get to that step?
Yeah. This chapter, this part is going to just be, I guess, navigating Icelander or drafting Icelander. You know, the part 0 or step 1 of success is Icelander has to be open.
Yes.
And what do we mean by Icelander being open? That's just there are not that many Icelander drafters in your pod. If there's 8 people, ideally there's 2 Icelander drafters.
Yep.
Obviously, the most ideal situation is 1 and it's just you. But you know, oftentimes there should be another. People should be able to kind of figure out that she's open. How do you tell that she's open? Well, there's a lot of Icelander cards left in the packs.
Knowing the pack like distribution is pretty key. Icelander is a little bit harder to read than Dromai or Phi because for those two, like their dedicated cards, you basically just have the 2 to 3 commons at the end. But Icelander can have ice cards appear in the generic slots.
Yep.
So it's actually pretty important, I think, to like keep track of those slots when you're trying to figure out, is Icelander open, is Icelander not open. What are some of the cards? What are some of the things that you're looking at to decide whether or not these cards are good?
Kind of funny. Actually, the first card for me is Spellfire Cloak.
Yeah.
Like that's like a pack 1, pick 1, pack 1, pick 2, pack 1, pick 3 situation where, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be an Icelander, but this is a really, really good start, is getting that cloak. And we talked about this in our episode 2, but cloak, sash, these are worth like 2 damage. It's like being able to start the game with 2 extra health.
Yeah, agreed. Some of the things that Cloak lets you do, for example, is it lets you play like a 2 cost card out of your arsenal and then plus use weapon with only 1 blue. And then so like just doing that kind of unlocks an extra point of damage by itself.
And it also just unlocks a card. Like you end up having to draft like a blue Polar Blast or a blue Polar Cap, and you have no choice. Like otherwise, you wouldn't have really been able to arsenal that card efficiently.
Yeah, definitely. In the mirror, I would say that it's almost mandatory. If you don't have AV, I think you're just kind of stuck.
The ways I identify Icelander as open, I kind of want to touch upon that, is usually around pick 3, pick 4, pick 5, and pick 6. So not the first 2 picks, right? Usually like 3 to like 7, I would even say. Basically, before I get my pack back, there's just a lot of Icelander cards, and often the way the packs break down, there will be a little bit more Icelander cards than Dromai or Fae. Like it's not impossible to see literally 6 commons that are all Icelander. Like it's 5, and that's like there's 2 ice cards in the first 3 card slot, and then there's 3 more Icelander cards in the back 7, and that's not counting rare or foil. So. That's a pretty good signal, and not only is it like a pretty good signal that it's open. So if like pack 3, pick pack 1, pick 3, 4, 5, 6, I see like 5 or maybe 6 Icelander cards because one's a rare, one's a foil. And I know you wanted to maybe talk about this in a future episode, but it's just like one of those things where I have a good feeling that if I take an Icelander card, I'm also going to be able to wheel an Icelander card.
I think I want to talk about this more in detail later on, but I think there's like you need a little bit of courage when you're playing draft. Like I know a lot of people are kind of like, well, especially like when you get a pack that's just like really strong for like any hero, right?
Yeah.
And you see like, oh, I could pick this like really strong card, but then I'm passing another like really strong, a couple of other like really strong cards, and maybe like all of my like future opponents are gonna go like into like these things, into the same hero that I'm going, and then my pack 2 is gonna be pretty bad. I think that in those scenarios, like you also have to come with the understanding that basically when you're passing the pack, their opponent is more the people that you're passing to are more committed than you are when you see the pack. Like they've taken more cards, and you're not gonna like get wheels unless you pass good cards, right? Like it's just not gonna happen. Like if there's 2 cards for Icelander in the pack, and you're like, oh, if I just pick one, and then the other people are gonna see that Icelander is quote unquote not open. Well, like what happens if there's one other Icelander card or Icelander drafter in the pod? You're just gonna get nothing back from that pack. So I think you do need a little bit of courage.
Yeah, there is a balance. There's a balance for sure. So yeah, like that's like the easiest way for me to tell that Icelander is open. There's just a sheer volume of Icelander cards.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it's because they're all yellow.
Yes.
So we do need to talk about, what are the good Icelander cards. But step 0 for drafting Icelander is open. And you have identified Icelander as open, and now you're going to be an Icelander. So let's talk about step 2, or step 1, is just drafting Icelander. We already talked about one of the key cards, Spellfire Cloak. So getting that out of the way, we're just going to assume that at some point during the draft, ideally in the first pack, you've picked it up. What's the other kind of like, there's like a checklist. There's only 3 things on this checklist for us.
Yeah.
The second thing on the checklist is a good amount of blues. I think 14 is kind of our minimum. It's our guideline for you guys. Like if you can't get 14 blues, so on average you're getting about 5 blues per pack, it's going to be a rough time. It's going to be a rough time.
I think knowing that also, sorry, to go back to the earlier point to identify whether or not Icelander is open. If you see like packs and they're like all red and yellow Icelander cards, and you count like the number and then it looks like there might be like some Icelander cards missing, it's not like a sure sign that like there's not like 2 other Icelander drafters. Maybe they just took the blues.
Yep.
Just
so like
because
a sheer volume. Yeah.
You need more blues in your deck total.
Yep. And then I think the only other checklist we have is kind of like it's a 2-parter. It just says a lot of 6 attacks in case you hit Dromai, and then in parentheses or you just dodge the Dromai.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's kind of interesting because I think Icelander will definitely struggle in drafts where there's like a, let's say there's a solo Dromai
yeah.
drafter, and then your pod breakdown is like 4 5s, 3 Icelanders, 1 Dromai.
Oh yeah, that Dromai is gonna like feast on you
Yeah,
guys, most
the
likely.
Dromai might actually lose to like one of the fives, but I think that it's like really difficult for Icelander to be like a very good Dromai deck.
Yeah, yeah, agree.
But I mean, like conversely,
Alternatively, there
yeah,
could be four Dromais, so you have a high chance of hitting them.
yeah,
But then at that point, it's hard for them to individually beat you. So, kind of interesting balance. But obviously, for in terms of all the three heroes, I think I prioritize poppers or the six attacks that trigger Phantasm much higher when I know I'm already in Icelander.
yeah. I think you were talking about this earlier. I think yellow Faendal's Fighting Spirit has to be
Yeah,
like a top tier card for Icelander, just
yeah,
because you can use the yellow to like activate your Waning Moon when you don't need it. When
yep,
you do need
yep.
it, that's
It's
great. It
a
gains you a life plus pops. So we go over like part of the reason why poppers are so integral to beating Dromai with Icelander, particularly like if the Dromai decks are a little bit better. It's just that it's really difficult for you to compete with them either when they play like 2 for 8s or when they play these like dragons like Yendurai, Necria, whatever that you just like cannot like efficiently like deal with.
Yeah, so that's our checklist. Spellfire Cloak, a bunch of blues, at least 14, and some poppers.
Yep.
Now, in terms of individual cards, we're not going to go through each one, but we do want to talk about this versus that is what I'm calling this. So we'll start with blue versus not blue.
Yeah.
I think when you're given that choice, I think 90% of the time you should be going with the blue. Like there should be a really good reason you're taking the not blue. It's probably a red.
I was gonna say here's like a scenario that might come up like pretty often. So let's say in the pack there's a red Aether Hail, which is a pretty good card. There's a blue Brain Freeze, and then like a blue, I don't know, like Arctic Incarceration. And I would say like quite early in the pack, so or picks, so you still haven't like really fleshed out your deck. I think a lot of people might actually be tempted to take the red Aether Hail just because like on face value, like that card is just like quote unquote stronger than the other two
Mm.
cards. But I think for the function and like how well your deck is gonna function, to me like most of the reds function in the deck like kind of the same. Like they're all just like damage that you do on your turn to like push your opponent into a break point so that you can kill them on their turn. And the only exception I think for me is red Aether Ice Vein. Like
Mhm.
that's the only card, and then we'll talk about in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But I think that's like the only card where like the value on that one card itself is just so high that I would want to pick it.
Yeah. So actually, engine are a little bit like kind of different. We're mostly aligned, but for me, even like red Aether Ice Fang doesn't hit it for me. Like I would still prefer to take a blue in those
Hmm.
situations. But the general gist is look, like 90% of the time, maybe even 99% of the time, you should be taking the blue when you get the choice. The second this versus that we have is damage dealing versus utility.
Yeah, so you have cards that are like utility cards. Like you could have, let's say, like blue strategic planning, blue
Mhm.
brain freeze,
Yeah.
blue healing balm, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sigil of protection. These cards might affect the damage race in some way, but they don't do damage.
Yeah, there's no right answer here. It's not like a 99%. I think we bias towards damage dealing, but some of the utility cards are a lot better than others. So like blue strategic planning, for example.
I think
Yeah.
that card is actually like first pickable for me now.
Oh
Like
yeah, I first pick it all the time.
like
So it's really funny. I have a quick anecdote. I did a draft last week at a store called Sip and Play in Brooklyn, and everyone knew that I was one of the Icelanders. We didn't know who the other one was, but for some reason they all knew it was me. That I was one of the Icelanders. I had shared divulged nothing, and then they're passing this pack, and then one person's like, "Oh, I can't pass that to him." I'm like, "What are you guys passing to me?" And then they're like, "There's a frost hex in that pack." I look at the pack. There is a frost hex, but
yeah.
there's also strategic planning, and I'm just like, uh. I like slam the strategic planning. And I just pass all the other cards, and I'm like, guys, frost hex is really not that good.
Yeah, we
They're
had
like, why did
a
you slam up the card so quickly? And I'm like, ah.
we had a game at Youngji's. I think I played against you.
Yeah,
Actually,
we did like 2 or 3 test games after that.
yeah,
You just
as
juiced me.
I had two blue strategic plannings in my deck, and basically just like every time I played against not only you but another person who was playing Fi,
Yeah.
and just like every time on their first Fi activation, they didn't
Yeah.
respond to like strategic planning, and then you just like gank them out of like four damage throughout the course of the game.
And it doesn't even cost you a card because it draws it back.
Yep.
Yeah. So like something you like by that same regard, blue cold snap is not that bad as well because it also nets you a card.
Yep.
It's just, damage dealing versus utility is just something we want to talk about. You should lean towards damage dealing, but particularly cold snap and blue strategic planning are pretty good utility cards.
Yeah, a lot of the
Um,
damage comes from your weapon anyways,
yes,
in those
yes, yeah.
scenarios.
Ice versus not ice.
Yeah, I think it depends. I would almost always pick damaging ice cards, like the wizard ice cards that also block 3,
Yeah.
over almost any like non ice card, just because you get the free value out of your hero ability.
Yeah.
And to
So
me,
they have to be
it's
blue.
yeah. Sorry, blues.
Yeah.
But then yeah, when it comes to like the other colors, it's tough. I think I would still pick like the ice damage dealers over most non-ice cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, just because they're also like a little bit more efficient.
Yeah. I think it's just something you got to keep in mind. So red ice cards, you got to play them. Like you're not pitching these. If you find yourself in a situation where you have to pitch them, it's not a good situation.
Yeah.
You don't want to arsenal them. So when you're fusing with them, it's really bad. It's really kind of awkward.
Mm-hmm.
But the yellow ice ones, you could fuse and still get a winning moon.
Yep.
So it's something to think about. But yeah, in general, like yeah, you should be prioritizing the ice cards. There's going to be less of them. So if you prioritize them, then you'll actually have some. Versus if you don't take them early, then you're not going to get them.
Yeah, and I
something
think
you mentioned. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say like also like hitting fuse on. There's like a couple of power cards that Icelander has access to,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Sigil of Permafrost, Aether Ice Vein, and it's just like if you don't hit fuse on these, those cards are just not that good. But
yeah,
if you hit
yeah,
fuse on them, they spike a lot.
yeah. They're worth a whole extra card basically
Mhm.
when you fuse.
Yeah.
And in fact, like Brain Freeze is not doesn't even do anything if you don't
Oh,
fuse
you
it.
got to look at their hand.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Okay, that's worth like half. I think half a point, I guess. Yeah. So something that you did mention is block 3 versus block 2, and I think this one is a lot more like clear to me at least. Like
Yeah.
there has to be a very compelling reason that I drafted block 2 over a block 3.
Oh, yeah, you're
Plain
telling
and
me you
simple.
don't like read the ripples?
No, I don't like. No, I don't like Read the Ripple.
Okay.
I don't like Cold Snap. That's not blue. Like basically, blue Read the Ripples is kind of like if you provided that as a token, like I could just have one or two.
Yeah.
I'm still not trying to put that in my deck for free.
I feel like that would make the format way better if they just made the read the ripples a token card.
Like that's the power level I feel like that card is at. Like you're like, oh, here's a token card that you could just put in your deck, and I'm like, I'll try not to, but if I have to.
Yeah.
And then of course the last thing is cost 0 versus costing 1 and 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we highly encourage you guys to draft as many cost 0s as possible. When you guys start playing, which is the next thing we're going to talk about, these games out as Icelander, especially versus Fae, just these cost 0s just give you a lot more flexibility. It kind of just gives you less opportunities to screw yourself, to kind of put yourself in a bad position.
Yeah.
When it comes to blocking and kind of planning out your turn.
Yeah, I think especially like when, like, because you don't always necessarily know like what your opponent has. So one thing that having a cost 0 does, it gives you like great modularity. So if it's like the last card that you decide either to block with or to not block with, if you block with it, then whatever. If you don't block with it, then you play it. But if you get stuck with like a 1 or 2 cost, 2 costs are definitely I think the worst. If you get stuck with a 2 cost, then sometimes like if you block, like you just end up with an extra card in your hand.
Yeah. So like general preference, try to get as many blues, try to deal damage. There are some good utility cards, but overall try to deal damage. Obviously prefer the ice card, prefer the block 3s, and prefer the cost 0s. These are all this versus that. Different scenarios require you to think about it differently, but those are just things that we wanted to bring. Well, I think the next thing we're going to talk about is just playing Icelander Unlimited. The one thing I want to talk about, and I'll give you the mic afterwards for playing Icelander Unlimited, is I'm terming it the flow. And that's basically, it's different when you play Icelander like most of you guys and I personally have not played a lot of Kano in limited. But it's different. Like you're gonna there's a certain thing where you're blocking typically with like one or two cards, and every single turn you're basically trying to arsenal card. So you're actually kind of intellect three, like you're playing with three card hands, but
Yep.
only four cards because you're playing also the card from your arsenal that you set the turn before.
Mm-hmm.
So turns are often like not really like as clear cut as you might be used to in terms of like, when you're just playing like in Welcome to Wraith Draft, you have four cards, your opponent has four cards, you play your four cards, you draw a fresh new hand. Your hand gets kind of bleeds onto the next turn
Yeah.
based off your decisions on this turn. So it's just something to keep in mind, right? Like you're always like trying to plan like what card am I arsenaling this turn? The answer sometimes is you're not going to play your arsenal card. And usually this is because your opponent's attacking you for so much damage. And
Yeah,
you
you
just
just have to block your whole hand.
yeah. And you can't block with your whole hand or block with three cards, pitch a card. Because I don't think I ever really want to be in a shields down situation like that.
Yep.
Sometimes you do. Like like it's hard to. I'm just saying, like most of the time you're trying to arsenal card. Sometimes you don't because you just don't play the card from your arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely do I want to play the card from my arsenal and not arsenal card.
Yeah.
That's like a very rare situation. I think the goal is to be very efficient with your cards. Make sure to be waning moon your opponent on their turn practically every turn because you have to be pressuring your opponent, even though it does feel like you're blocking a lot, or else you'll never get them in a situation where they're basically in what we call the danger zone, which honestly like could start at 12, but really realistically starts at 8.
Yeah, I mean like you have to like figure that if we talked about Icelander's character profile, if her like main strength is basically uh putting your opponent dead on their turn, then you want to kind of maximize your ability to get into that situation, right?
And another way you can kind of lose as Icelander, and we kind of alluded to this, is getting caught with extra cards in your hand.
Yeah.
So your opponent attacks for 3, you don't block the 3, then he attacks for like 1 or 2, and now you don't want to block that either because you don't want to use one card to block those.
Mm-hmm.
And then he plays like a healing ball.
Oh, you got me so many times with that.
And then you have like 3 cards in your hand, but you can only really utilize like 1 or 2. Like it's like so. Like you basically just lost an extra 3 life. Like their healing bomb gained them 3 and dealt you 3.
Yeah, definitely.
So just by blocking early, you do kind of get yourself in trouble if they have Stoke the Flames, I think is the most punishing.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes they don't have Stoke the Flames, and sometimes they have like nothing almost, and you just have extra cards that you you can't really do anything with.
That card is really good.
Yeah, Stoke is just a good card. Another way to, so that's like trying not to lose is just trying not to block poorly.
Yeah.
But trying to win is knowing when you just, your hand is like, this hand is great. I'm going to take the damage and I'm going to do like great things and I have to take damage. This is my pivot turn. And identifying pivot turns for Icelander is a little bit different. I think, do you have like some examples?
Yeah, so I think the main example that I can think of, like this is like the pivot that you want to hit, is you want to have basically you have a 5-card hand at the beginning of the turn and you have an arsenal set up. So you can use a blue to play your arsenal card and use Waning Moon, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And then your last 3 cards in your hand is an ice blue,
Yep,
another blue, and an Aether Ice Vein.
Yep.
And if you add up all the damage, so if we assume that the arsenal card somehow affects life about 5 altogether with your...
This actually is a 3-turn sequence, by the way. It's starting from turn 0 on your opponent's turn, then you have a real turn, then you're trying to kill your opponent on turn, like I guess 2, which is also your opponent's turn.
You actually don't you don't need to kill your opponent with this sequence, but it basically it like the value wise.
Yeah.
So I wanted to focus on like the value of like this like 5-card hand.
Yep.
Assuming that the arsenal card somehow affects life around 5 points, and I mean you can do that.
Blue Aether Hail.
You can do it with a blue Aether Hail. You can do it with a frosting and a quell. You can do it with There's like a couple different ways that you can do it, but then you do 5 damage somehow with that plus your weapon. Then you play the Aether Ice Vein on your turn. So that does another 5. You're at 10 damage. You make them discard a card or like pitch.
Mhm.
And then so they lose 2 to 3 points there.
Mhm.
And then you set up another blue ice card to be able to
Mhm.
do another 5 damage. So this
Yep.
is around like 19 points.
Of life like swing. And actual damage is probably about 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I forgot to mention you also get like 1 to 2 frostbites there.
Yeah. So
So,
like in total it's 5 plus 5 plus 5, 15 damage.
yep.
It's 2 frostbites
Mm-hmm.
and it's a potential discard trigger. So either pitching 2 or straight up losing a card.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's like almost 20 points, right? If you value a card 3 and then value each frostbite at 1.
Yeah. So because this 5 card hand provides so much value, it's like worth kind of face tanking for. And so you kind of have to be cognizant of that. Like if this is how you're going to kind of like turn the game around, then you need to set yourself up to have enough life total where you can kind of like tank around like that.
Yeah. Like you can't block with any cards with that hand. So if the Fi is having what we call like an average hand, which is like a 13 damage hand,
Yeah.
that means you need to be at 14 when the sequence starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
But
mean
that's just like that's like one of the ways that you can win. Like I mean like there's like variations on it. You don't need to have like an arsenal card you can block with one of the cards in your hand. It's like a 3 card hand at minimum.
Mhm.
But like that's just like what you have to think about. Another thing that you can get a pivot with is if somehow you can generate a large number of frostbites. There's cards like Arctic Incarceration Red, Eisenhower Weather Vane, or Sigil Permafrost that all can generate around like 3 frostbites each at least.
Yep.
And if you get your opponent kind of like stuck with 2 or 3 cards in their hand, that can provide like enough value for you to like pivot because you spent essentially like you spent 1 card to cancel out 2 cards on their turn.
Yeah. I will make a note though that Red Arctic of the 3 that you just said is like the easiest to kind of pivot into that situation.
Yeah, oh yeah,
I think like
definitely.
Red Eisenhower, like
You need a
they're
lot of
just like
things.
scary for me sometimes.
Yeah,
And Red Sigil Permafrost and less so, but Red Eisenhower particularly is just like the stars sometimes have to align and sometimes the stars do not align.
yep.
And this is just like a thing I kind of want to mention. It's just like the yellow Eisenhower sometimes is a little bit better because when you don't get it, when the things do not come together,
Oh
at
yeah,
least you
yeah.
can pitch it. And that's just kind of a general thing with I don't know, with Icelander is just like if you're so used to playing Fi and playing Dromai, you're just about the reds and being efficient. But there are times when the yellows are okay. Like I don't feel that bad having them, and sometimes you pitch it and you're just like, thank God this is a yellow. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think the whole point is that like you need to somehow generate like this value somewhere, and it's really difficult for Icelander to generate the value just from doing damage because all your cards just like do equal damage if you're using them to like attack with, like the
Yeah.
reds.
I kind of wanted to end the podcast with talking about literally just what some of our 3-0 Icelander limited decks have looked like. Um,
Yeah.
You have had more. I've had a lot less. I've only drafted once, but
Hmm.
I did 4 pre-releases where I played Icelander. All I did Icelander at the Ohio like team sealed. So that was
Yep.
like 5 or 6 more rounds. So I just start with like one of the ones that I kind of remember pretty vividly.
Yeah.
And that I thought was more realistic. Like one of my pre-releases, I had 22 blues in a seal pool. So like I just like that's not realistic. I did like go undefeated, blah blah blah, but like I don't think I'm ever gonna see that again.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that I've won with, I've had 17 blues.
Hmm.
I had 7 yellows,
Yep.
and then I had 6 reds. So it's kind of like my base configuration.
Hmm.
I did have Spellfire Cloak. I had the slippers. I did not have a headpiece besides the miter. I had the Frostburn
Yeah.
arm piece, the Quelp arm piece. I think the most important thing I kind of learned about that deck was that I did not have to play like basically any block twos. Like everything in my deck I could block through with,
Hmm.
and that just gave me so much flexibility when it came to kind of navigating through hands.
Yeah.
And that a lot of the yellows were just like fine. Like I would find you don't get that many opportunities. Like there's only going to be like 5 or 6 turns in the game, typically.
Yeah.
But I would find at least like one turn where I'm pitching a yellow and I don't feel like terrible. And like I typically feel terrible having yellows, so like I don't know, it just like was like news to me that the yellows when you're not blocking could still be a real card. Because when you're pitching a yellow dealing 3, like that's the same thing as blocking for 3 with the
Yeah,
card. So
all of the Icelander decks that I've won with, I think had minimum 16 blues.
yes, yes.
Uh,
This one deck I wanted to call out because I had only 17, and I actually thought it was so bad because you were with me at most of these pre-releases. I was
yeah,
just somehow opening like 20 blues
yeah, yeah.
like every single one. But I only had 17 and it was still winnable. I did go undefeated at that pre-release as well. I did face a Dromai, but like that was the only one game I felt like I got gifted because they pitched Necria
Oh yes,
on
yes.
like turn like 1 or turn 2. I can't remember. In my head, I would never pitch that, guys. Like if you're Dromai, you're against Icelander.
Yeah.
Like
Let's keep
I'm
it.
taking the extra damage, doing whatever I can. I'm gonna hold it in my hand for turn cycle if I can't like play it.
I think like you said, I've drafted one Icelander deck that ended up having like 14 reds, and that was definitely like the most awkward to
Mhm.
play.
Yeah.
Definitely the most success is when I have around like just barely breaking double digits, like 10 reds,
Sure.
and then the
Sure.
rest is like blues and yellows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I have always played Spellfire Cloak in all of my Icelander decks,
Yeah.
and I have never played Read the Ripples in any of my successful Icelander decks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That card. Like, can we just talk about that card for like half? Like, that card is so awkward. Like, I can't believe it's worded the way it's worded, and I can't believe strategic planning also exists
yeah, yeah.
because strategic planning says draw a card at the beginning of the end phase,
Yep,
and read the ripple says at the beginning of your end phase.
yep,
Like, this is a huge difference for a hero that's playing in your opponent's turn.
yes. Uh,
Ah,
I think that almost all of them have had, I want to say all the successful decks have had at least, or no more than, I would say 4 of my reds don't do damage. So that's either Brain Freezes or Sigil Protections or Oasis Respite.
yep, yep,
Because if I am playing reds, I do want them to do damage, especially I think for the mirror, it's important. If you
yeah,
if you just have if you just have cards like Brain Freeze or like Arctic Incarceration, it's like really difficult for you to do enough damage, I think, in the
yeah.
mirror.
You're just buying time. Like, the whole first phase of playing Icelander into non-Icelander is you're just trying to deal like 10 damage to them so that you can like they're within a turn cycle of getting into the danger zone.
Yeah, and then especially and then in the mirrors, it's a little bit trickier because oftentimes you will just have cards that kind of awkwardly float around because you can't block as easily.
Yep.
So maybe you just like pitch it to Arcane Barrier or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're just like not affecting as much
Yeah.
you're not affecting as much damage because the most that you could affect on the block is 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you have to take a little bit of extra damage as Icelander mirror just so you can play a red
Yeah.
because you don't want to pitch it. You don't want to like draw it again. It happens.
Yep. Uh yeah, I think that's basically what most of my decks look like. But you don't need. I think the nice part about drafting Icelander is that you actually don't need any of like the rares. I think it's a little bit different from Dromai in that sense, where I feel like
Hmm.
a really good
Yes.
Dromai deck you need rares, and I think it's also somewhat true for Fi, where you want to have like the Rising Resent or what is it?
Rise from the Ashes, Mounting Anger.
Mounting
Okay.
Anger, Rise from the
Yeah.
Ashes. Like these cards are like the power cards. Whereas I think for
Yeah.
Icelander, like basically the power just comes in consistency.
Yeah. That's
It's
fair.
kind of like drafting Guardian in that sense, where if you have like the right ratios,
Hmm.
you that's like what's setting you up for success.
Actually, it's so funny that you mentioned that. Lately, I have been preferring drafting Icelander because of this, because I love decks that reward you for having more blues, and more blues kind of gives you like a resource advantage
Yeah.
and consistency advantage. And it's kind of funny because like her weapon like deals a lot of damage on a turn cycle, right?
Yep.
Like you're doing 5 damage if you're attacking both turns,
Yeah.
and yeah, I don't know. I love blocking, play pitching. blues, and I don't know. I know I'm saying. Oh, and also, okay, I think the most cool thing, and I hope this encourages you guys who are kind of on the fence about drafting Icelander, uh, is it is so much more intellectually stimulating to me, at least,
Mm-hmm.
playing Icelander than like the Faemir. Like nothing is more miserable to me than playing Faemirs.
Mm.
Like we roll the dice, someone goes first or second, whatever, and then we're just like bashing each other for like the 2 turns, and then one of us is like, "Oh no, like I'm in the danger zone. My hand all blocks too." The other guy's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, my hand all has go again. Like you're dead." And you're like, "Oh, I'm dead." And then I
yeah.
don't know. It's not satisfying for me. So I hope that we have said some useful things or insightful things. But Yanji says this all the time, but we're always looking for feedback. So if you guys have like more questions, if you guys disagree with something we said, like please, by all means, like comment or just reach us on Twitter or DM us.
Yeah.
But yeah, we typically try to say like kind of everything that's on our mind and not really sandbag or hold back anything.
Next episode, we're probably going to cover Dromai and draft.
Mhm.
It's a little bit trickier
Yeah.
topic. And then we may or may not do a FI episode depending on how Michael's feeling.
Yeah, so it's Yanji kind of wants to do one. The really reason is just because I feel like it doesn't require a 40 minute. You don't need to listen to someone talk to you for 40 minutes to learn how to draft file. Like I feel like
I mean,
we could talk.
that might be a good episode because in 2 weeks we're gonna be going to Utrecht, so that'll be a nice short one.
Yeah, that's fair. Or we could spend a little bit more time on kind of like the min max edge cases where I think that little things that you can do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening. At the time that this goes out, we will be on all of the platforms. So I will post, if you're listening to this on Spotify, give us, I don't even know like what you do on Spotify.
I think it's like reviews, but we'll talk about that in our next episode.
Yeah. But it should be like available, and I will post the links to everything when I post this on social media.
Great. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.